Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today is no exception. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Alastair McDermott. Alastair is absolutely swimming in the sea of artificial intelligence. He's got a lot of insights, I'm sure he can share with us, and dying to get his views on where we're at and where we're going. So let's begin, Alastair. Welcome to the Global Discussion. Tell us a bit about yourself, just for people who maybe haven't met you at this stage.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me, Simon. And yeah, I'm really fascinated by this whole world of generative AI in particular. So my background, I've been working for myself for about 18 years now. Previously, I was a software engineer in a company called Sun Microsystems, and I realized I was a terrible, terrible employee. I was pretty good at programming, but not at my job, and definitely not at being a coworker. So I had to go quit my job and start my own business just to be my own boss. It was the only way I could operate. And I started out doing what I could do, which was kind of techie programming and search engine optimization. And I got into marketing and websites and that side of things. So I was doing that for a long time. And what I realized was when I saw ChatGPT 3.5 in November 22, I realized the writing was on the wall for website development, and I could see already that it was pretty good at coding even then. So in kind of mid 2023, about 6 months later, I decided, okay, that's it. I have to go all in on AI. So I decided to just completely rebrand the business. And the business is now called HumanSpark.ai. And I wanted to focus a bit on the human side. That's why I have the word human in the name, because I think a lot of people focus on the technology part. And I think it's important that we focus on the human part as well.
That makes a lot of sense, Alastair. Thanks for sharing that. And going all in on AI is certainly the journey you've been on. And I want to get into it a little bit because you often talk about being a recovering software developer, and I know you kind of mentioned that a little bit, but you're helping people implement what I think you refer to as human first AI,
Hmm.
right? Now, in terms of doing that and being more people focused, a lot of people struggle with this, don't they? Because you've got some companies who are saying, well, we can reduce the workforce, we'll throw everything at AI. You've got some companies that have done that and realized it's not as straightforward. We hear about human in the loop concepts a lot.
Hmm.
And your results speak volumes, and you maybe share some of the results that you've seen because you've had some real transformational projects. Are there any sort of quick wins or ways people should be thinking about a human and AI approach, and any sort of don't do's and these mistakes happen all the time that spring to mind?
Hmm. Okay, well, yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in there. So first thing first, I think that when you're thinking about AI and productivity and when we give a human access to AI and the tools that we have now, um, the person can get so much more work done. So they can be much more productive. And that maybe feels like, well, maybe you can get rid of people, and a lot of people are doing that. But I think they're not accounting for institutional knowledge that's walking out the door. And um, there's an awful lot of glue between the bits that is hard to replicate with AI. People are doing more, I think, than is obvious on the surface. And so I think I would much rather empower your existing team and let your existing team, instead of reducing your workforce by 80%, instead take your 100% workforce and have them do 5 times as much, if you're able to do that. Yeah, I think it's a bit short-sighted. I'm also like, as a person, I would like to think that I'm empathetic, and I think that people should be more. Like when I look at the world as it is right now, I think there's a kind of a lack of empathy, and in fact, even sometimes AI is faking empathy better than human beings are, which is kind of scary. But yeah, so that's one side of thing. There's a whole I can go as deep as you want on this. I'll just briefly cover a couple of things. In terms of AI and what you can get from it, productivity is table stakes. It's like the basis, but there's a lot more that you can get other than just productivity. So I think the big thing for me is that apart from getting more productive, you can also use AI in a transformational way. So to give you new capabilities that you simply didn't have before as a human or as an organization. Like for example, I can describe design. I've been working in the world of design for a long time, but a bit like somebody who's done a degree in music but can't play an instrument. I can't actually do design, but now I can with AI tools. So that's a new capability that I simply didn't have before. Um, there's loads of other capabilities. A lot of businesses, organizations now have the capability to build their own software in-house to create tooling to replace these big kind of behemoth software packages that they're paying a lot of money for. Um, they can create specific tools. So that's like a new capability, or they can develop a new service or a new product line because of having this new capability. There's also better decision making. So you can have smarter decision making. AI can help us to think. And I know it can also hinder our thinking. That's what a study from MIT found, although it was a very small sample size, and there's some problematic issues with that study. But at the same time, it did find that there's a possibility that AI can diminish our ability to think if we use it in the wrong way. And so let me just go back through those. So we have productivity, increased productivity, which is kind of for me is just table stakes. Like you should be able to get increased productivity. That should be the basic. New capabilities, transformational things, better decision making because of having more data, and also because you can brainstorm with these tools. Like they're pretty smart now. And you can actually use it to bounce ideas and brainstorm and use it as a kind of a decision-making assistant. And then the last one for me is accelerated learning. And you can learn much, much quicker now because you can focus and dive in on just the things that you need to know. And you can also have AI explain things to you in different ways. Um, so those are kind of the four major kind of opportunities that I see for people to get a big win from AI.
Mm.
The other thing that you asked me about was you asked me about specific results. So I can give you two examples. One example is from a medical lab that tests blood samples. And when they got a sample in, they would receive like a capsule or a vial of blood, and they would also get a sheet with some handwritten information on it and a barcode at the top, stuck on from a sticker. The same sticker would be with barcode would be on the vial of blood. That's how they track. So what they would then do is they would take that information, put it into the computer system. They would take the blood, they would uh, what's called pipette it onto a sheet with media, little wells, and they would put it onto the wells. And the wells have this media in there, which actually causes a reaction to happen. And then they put it into a machine to do what's called an ELISA test, and that would then tell whether there were certain pathogens in the blood samples. And so what they would need to do then was when it would come out, they would need to take so that the sheet that has all of these wells on it, the plate, it would have some controls on it. So what they would need to do is they'd need to look at the values of the numbers from the controls, and then they'd need to calculate whether there were positives, borderlines, or negatives. And they would have to calculate using the control because it wasn't the same every time. So, and it was complex. So what I did was I looked at what they were doing and I created two super simple apps. One was to scan the data sheet with all of the information and put it into a format for the database. So instead of taking 10 minutes per sample sheet, it now took about 20 seconds or so to get that into they just had to put their phone, click the button and hit go. Then I also took the part where they calculated the regression curve for this test and built a little app again in AI to take the output from the test, the ELISA machine, and actually do all the calculations. And so now instead of taking a couple hours to do the calculations and checking everything, it would pull out all of the information in about 20 seconds. So overall, it took their time per sample down from about, I think it was about an hour and a half uh, for one sample process end to end to about 2 minutes. So it's incredible. Now the cool thing for me about this is from a human perspective, we had these really smart lab scientists who were very good at their job, who were spending inordinate amounts of time on administration and grunt work. And now they've got that time back. So now instead of doing these things, what they're able to do is they're able to actually look at the data and say, okay, now that we know this, and in this specific instance, this was animal blood. So they were able to say, okay, we now we have the location. By the way, the first app also created GPS coordinates and mapped it onto a map. So they can say, okay, we see this this particular thing in this location, and we see a bit of it over here as well. Is there some connection between those? And they can start to work on the actual important parts rather than working on the grunt work of data entry and rote calculations. So it also did something really interesting that I didn't expect. And this is kind of one of these cool things about using AI and playing around with these tools. Um, it started saying, hey, by the way, you need to tell your lab technicians that they have to work on their pipetting technique. I can see from the variable from the results in each well that they need to work on their pipetting, which is actually getting the drops of blood into the thing. And it could actually recognize issues that we never would have known about and say, hey, this is something you need to work on, which I think is just
That's
astonishing.
incredible.
So,
Yeah.
so that's one example. The other example is a much more simple one. It's a professional services company, and we just did the calculation. We surveyed we did some training for all of their staff, surveyed their staff, and figured that conservatively, after spending about 10 grand on training, that they were getting an increase of about 20 grand productivity every month, just in terms of how much time was being saved. Now, I do think that there are some issues with how people measure that productivity in terms of revenue, or not in terms of revenue, but in terms of money, because I think that what's happening is that is benefiting the human employee, but not necessarily the organization, because they're not always working on something else. But maybe what it's doing is de-stressing them, making their life easier, making their job more pleasant. So I would still see that as a win, but I understand if you're looking at the numbers, then maybe not. So it depends. There's a lot to discuss. It's a lot of nuance there. Now, sorry for the big
No,
monologue.
they're great examples, and I think the blood examples and the pipette work. I mean, that's mind blowing that it picked up something that probably they weren't even looking for or aware of. I mean, that's
Hmm.
really incredible. And I was going to ask you about, well, if AI is I mean, that's important work, but it is still repetitive tasks that the AI is picking up, and then
Hmm.
therefore the humans can focus on other stuff. And you kind of explained as well, well, that means they can start looking at comparing the data sets and saying, well, is there a relationship here, and looking further into it rather than just the process of doing that repetitive task. The thing that sprang to mind though is, what about errors? Is it much better at, much lower error detection, or sorry, error issues than when humans do it? Like, because we hear about it making mistakes all the time,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
are you seeing huge efficiencies there too, Alistair, or what's the verdict?
Um, so I think there's a lot of nuance to all of the conversation around this. So when you're doing something where there are calculations to be done, it's very easy to tell if they're right or wrong. And so what you can do is you can spot check. And that's what we did. We put in a system where we checked. And in fact, I even said to Claude, which was the AI that I built the calculations tool in. I said, Claude, can you tell me all the different ways that I can cross-check and verify your results here? And it gave me a load of different ways I could do it. From manual to pulling out a calculator to using a spreadsheet to and it just talked through all the different ways that we could do that. So yeah, you do need to put in, some people call these evaluations or evals. You do need to check when you're setting up these things, you need to have some system of checking what the output is. Now we also know when we started, we also did manual cross checks of everything, like 100%. Um, there's also an issue where it depends on what you're testing, right? Now, in the case of this medical lab, they also test human blood samples. And if you test human blood samples, suddenly what we built for 2.5 grand as an experiment, we'd have to spend about 300 grand on because of all of the different requirements to make sure that the robustness of the process. And actually, this is one of the things, if you hear people talking about the EU AI Act and things like that, this is one of the things that it does, is it requires that when you have a higher risk factor, then you have to have a higher standard. And so the risk factor is much higher, obviously, if it's, somebody's a human is getting a diagnosis compared to an animal that is possibly already deceased. So there's a big difference in those two things. And so that's where the things like the EU AI Act, I think, are positive because they get you to be more rigorous in your approach to these things.
No, it's a
Um,
great point. Yeah.
yeah. So there's loads of different ways we can go. Loads of different things I can talk about with this, but I'm just aware that I have the ability to monologue. So please ask me questions.
Well, no, it's fascinating, and I think you're right to point that out because when it comes to human tests or regulated industries, health, life science is certainly a heavily regulated industries, and that regulation changes as you
Hmm.
go around the world. US, Europe, etc. And then, of course, you've got things like financial regulations, which play another role in there, and multiple other ones. So I think that's a
Hmm.
good thing to call out. Well, I'm dying to ask you where you sit on the. It's crystal ball gazing time, Alastair. But um, Sam Altman recently said the latest release of the OpenAI model is just another stepping stone on the journey to true AGI.
Hmm.
So, are we on the route to true AGI? Will we see it in the next 5 to 8 years, as some people are saying? Is it in our lifetime? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on this?
Okay, so just for anybody listening who doesn't know, the term AGI is artificial general intelligence. And like all terms in AI, nobody has a specific definition of it. Everybody has their own definition, but it's kind of generally accepted that it means when AI becomes as intelligent as a regular human being, or some people would say more intelligent than the most intelligent human being. There's loads of different ways of measuring that. Some people would argue that it already got there with O3, which was a slightly older model from ChatGPT earlier this year. And yeah, so I think that the issue for me is the what we call in AI, we call the jagged edge. And the jagged edge is this concept that AI is amazingly good at some things and incredibly bad at others. And it's hard to predict what it's going to be good at and what it's going to be bad at. But in particular, if you look at large language models, LLMs, which is kind of the backbone or the base technology behind ChatGPT and all of those, um, it's really good at language because it's a language model specifically. So it's really good at that. And it's really good at the simulation of thinking. Now, I do want to mention something because I get a bit frustrated sometimes. I hear people say things like, it's not really thinking. And it's like, yeah, I understand that. That's what the A means. The A is artificial. So yes, it's not really thinking, but it is simulating thinking and simulating rationalizing and reasoning. And it does that particularly well. And yet there's other things that it can be quite poor at. Like there's the famous one of how many R's are in the word strawberry. And it can't count because that's not what its job is. That's not what it does. But what we found is as we start to give these access to tools, like so, for example, if you take somebody who doesn't know how to count, but then you show them how to use a calculator, and you say, okay, I just want you to add these two numbers and show them how to do that. All they need to do is use the tool and tell you what the result is. We can do the same thing with these language models. We can say, here's a bunch of tools that you can use the appropriate tool for the job and use that to get a result. So you can actually do some really cool things. So to come back to your question of like, are we approaching AGI? Some would argue that we're already there, and some would argue that we're a long way away. Some people say that you can't actually get to AGI, or the step above it is uh, when AI becomes more intelligent than humans, super intelligence, or something of that. Some people would argue that you can't get there on the current technology, which is language models. That we need something else beyond that.
Great point.
And that's I'm not an AI researcher in one of the top labs, so I can't really give an opinion on that. But what I can say is what we've already got, even if all development paused tomorrow, would still have ripple effects and still be being integrated for the next 10, 15, 20 years in our society, in our organizations, our schools, our businesses, everywhere. What we've got already is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think the latest announcement on the new model was that some of the older models you were sort of at school level, then you're at college level, now you're at university and PhD level.
Mhm.
And it just seems to keep getting better and better all the time. And as you say, as it interconnects with other systems, platforms, and the more data that gets shared there, it seems to be just improving exponentially. It just seems to be mind-blowingly good.
Mhm.
Though I want to ask you something, Mel, because you've wrote a book as well called The AI Powered Thought Leader,
Mhm.
and you explore quite a number of topics, obviously in some depth. But you used AI, I think, in the writing process, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking to another colleague of ours fairly recently about how you did that, and I thought it was very interesting, particularly for authors, particularly for people looking to think that they want to write a book. But the way you used it, I thought, was quite unique and quite different to sort of traditional ways of writing a book, traditional ways of thinking about the publishing world. Could you share a bit of light into that, Alistair?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a few different issues. So, first thing is if you say, "Hey, ChatGPT, write me a book on topic X," it's going to give you a terrible book, if it does give you a book at all. And that's not the way that I use it personally. So there is, and a friend of mine says that using AI to write a book is like using a car to run a marathon. So we had a good debate about that on my podcast a while back. And I get his point as well. So for me, the question is, okay, if we want to use AI to do something like writing a book, uh, it has to be a good book. There has to be me in the book. Otherwise, I can't put my name on the cover. So, how can I use it to assist me have my thoughts and all the way through the book and end up with a good book? And so, one of the issues or one of the things that I think about using AI is I think about kind of our subconscious knowledge that we have that is undocumented that we have particularly as experts. Now I think AI is incredibly powerful in the hands of an expert. If you have a subject matter expert who's also an expert in using AI, that's a superpower. That's when you get to 10x productivity. um what I and the reason for that, by the way, is because when AI makes mistakes, a junior person with less experience doesn't always know it's made a mistake and they have to get it checked. Whereas a subject matter expert knows instantly if something's right or wrong and can move on very quickly. So I think that's one of the reasons why subject matter experts learning AI is really like that's something I'm deeply passionate about because I can see them getting huge benefit from it. Okay, back on topic. Sorry about the tangents. Um, right. So if you want to write a good book, what I want to do is I want to think about, okay, well, what makes a good book? Or for me, the book kind of book I care about is a useful, practical, actionable business book. Those are the types of books that I write and that I want to write. And so, by the way, I've written books before and published before ChatGPT came out. So just in case people are wondering, I haven't written all my books in AI. Just this one was one I really wanted to focus down on. I decided to start building tools around the book. Now, I'm in the position where I have a podcast that has 175 episodes, and that's called a recognized authority. It's on hiatus now as I work on AI. But I did have the advantage or benefit of speaking to publishers, authors, writing coaches, And almost, I'd say probably every second person that had the podcast had a published book, many of them commercially published. And one of the people was Alan Weiss, who's got about 70 books. Another was Mark Schaefer, who's got about 15 books. So many, many people who are experts at writing books. I also interviewed a guy called Rob Fitzpatrick who wrote a book called Write Useful Books. So I have a lot of kind of unconscious knowledge and documented knowledge around what makes for a good business book. I've also read many of them, so I know what I like. And so what I did is I started to codify this knowledge, turning it into a document that says, here's what makes the outline of a good business book. Here are the criteria that it should meet. And so then what I did was I codified this up as a framework, and then I gave it to AI and I said, I want you to help me write a book that fits this criteria. And I'm going to give you the outline, and then I'm going to have a conversation with you. I'm going to tell you all the bits that I want to have in there. And I had tons and tons of notes. Now, the other part of this is I had this other podcast called the AI Powered Thought Leader, which is now the AI Powered Business Leader. And that podcast was one where I spoke to Joe about the car and the marathon analogy. I spoke to Jonathan Stark, Mark Schaefer, Alan Weiss as well on this podcast as well as some other really smart people, all about AI and thought leadership. And so what I did was I took all my notes from those conversations and I started to, in my own head, I had a beer in a hotel in Denmark I was in at the time, and I was having a beer and I was just writing down notes on a sheet of paper. I took those and I had conversations with AI saying, "Here's what I think about this. I'd like to start to work this into the outline." And so I came up with the high level outline of the entire book, and then I started to work on the lower level outline, which is within each chapter, and how I want each chapter to be. And so I got AI to help me with that. Now, some of it I wrote manually by just typing in, some of it I wrote manually by dictating, and then some of it I said, here's what I want you to write about this. Write the thing for me in my voice and style. And I gave it a lot of information about that because I have hundreds of thousands of words that I'd written before AI ever existed that I'm able to say, here's what my voice and style look like or sound like. Here's how I want you to write. Um, the next thing that I did was, excuse me, I built a developmental editor tool. And the developmental editor is that's the editor. They're not the editor who goes through line by line and looks at it to see do you have any typos or grammatical mistakes. They're the editor who looks at the whole layout of the book and says, maybe you should add another chapter or delete this chapter or move this chapter before this chapter or move this section from one chapter to another. So that's they're kind of looking at the book as a whole. And so what I did was I built an AI that assistant that was an expert developmental editor, and I got that to critique and work on the book and read through it. And then the last thing I did most recently was I created a beta reader system. Now, if you write a book, one of the hardest things to do is to get feedback from beta readers quickly. So what I did was I said, okay, here is my ideal target reader. This is the person I want to read this. Now, I want you to create 5 variations, slightly different. Call them, I think we called it like Alfred, Bob, Charlie, Doug, A, B, C, D, E. And we had 5 beta readers, and each one of them had a slightly different personality. So one of them was a hard-nosed veteran who'd been around the industry for 30 years. Another was somebody who was just leaving corporate to go out on their own. And so there was different variations of the target reader, and they would all have slightly different things that they care about. So then I got AI to read each chapter of the book from the perspective of each of those people and give notes and feedback. Now, normally what you do in this process is you would go to your email list and you'd say, hey guys, anybody want to read my book? I'd love to get your feedback. And, a small amount of people put their hands up. And then even a smaller amount of those would actually give you feedback, and it would usually be a month later. So like that would take ages. Whereas this way, even though the feedback is not human, it's synthetic feedback from these synthetic beta readers, it's still useful and it still helps you to improve the book that you're working on. So I was able to use that to help make the book better as well. Um, So I kind of built like a suite of tools around this. I also, because I'm a nerdy engineer, I built a whole system where like I wrote the book in Visual Studio, which is a programming tool. And so I was able to use this kind of this agents this bundle of agents to do all these various different things. Um, and yeah, it's complex to look at, but when you dig into it, it's actually all very each individual part is quite simple.
Yeah, and I've been very privileged to have a little sneak peek at what you built because you shared it with me before, and I think it's mind-blowingly good. It's exceptionally well put together, and particularly those synthetic sort of book critics or editors or supporters, whatever you call
Hmm.
them. I think it was a phenomenal way of doing it, and to me, it's kind of I think I said last time we spoke it adds something to the book that I think other books may possibly be missing because they don't go through this process. They go through, in inverted
Hmm.
commas, a more traditional review process, and I think that's something special.
Yeah, it's I mean it's certainly different, and I showed it too because I have a commercial publisher who's published one and is going to publish a second book of mine, and I showed him this process and he was blown away by it. But he said, look, this is really useful for people who do self-publishing, but for people who do traditional publishing, like if they get a manuscript from a book in June, they're not going to publish it until September of the following year. That's when it's going to be on shelves. And that's nothing to do with the speed of editing. There's all of these other things that have to happen. And so it's useful for a subset of people who are writing, particularly those who are doing self-publishing. Now,
Mm.
by the way, I just want to mention I did actually rename that book because I kept modifying it, working it, and I re-released it as Use AI, Stay Human. So that's the name of that book now. If anybody's looking for it, it's on
Very good.
Amazon in Kindle already, and I'm gonna have it on in print soon. I just have to get around to doing the print version.
So give us the title once more, Alistair.
It is Use AI, Stay Human,
There you go.
and it's really focused on people who are experts at their job and wanting to know how to use AI to go to the next level with that.
Thank you for sharing that. Great insight into a real world use case of using AI to improve a process in this case. So, um, the last thing I want to ask you about, and I think it's important for people listening because you've put together some pretty powerful AI toolkits, right?
Mhm.
You've got a number of them. Could you maybe share what they're about, why people use them, what's the benefit of looking through these toolkits? Because you put quite a bit of work into this, and it might help people on
Mhm.
their AI journey, or even maybe rescue somebody who's struggling with an initiative or something like that.
Yeah. So, okay. So the AI toolkit that I have is three white papers. One which is called Opportunity and AI Adoption. Second is called Risk and AI Adoption, and the third is called an AI Adoption Roadmap. And so they're basically everything that I've learned from working with organizations who are trying to implement this and individuals. It's more useful for organizations who are trying to deploy it, across all of their staff. But even individuals, the first two would be really useful to read. The adoption roadmap, maybe not quite so much because it's more organizational in nature. But it talks about the things that I mentioned earlier. So opportunity would talk about productivity, capabilities, decision making, accelerated learning. It's got some case studies in there and then some trends and what I think is going to happen. Risk and AI adoption is kind of talking about the downsides, and there's a lot of downsides of AI, and I think that we need to be very measured, and there's a lot of nuance to AI, like the power usage is high, the fact that it can make mistakes, biases. There's a lot of stuff like that that we need to be aware of. And there's also going to be some regulations like the EU AI Act and things like that. So um, so the risk in AI adoption is just kind of helping people be aware of what the risks are, and thinking about ethics and compliance and privacy and actually dealing with regulations and putting in place a risk management strategy if you need one of those for your organization particularly. And then the adoption roadmap is a step-by-step guide on, okay, we don't use AI. We need to use AI. How do we get there? How do we get our staff using it? How do we use it properly, safely? So those are those are some tools. They're completely free on my website. You don't even have to opt in with email or anything. You just go to my website and just click on the cover, and it'll open up, and you can download and print and read away whatever you want to do with them. I also have a ton of other resources on my website. I've got so many that I can't actually mention them all, but I've got loads of custom GPTs, which are these little AI assistant tools that I've created in ChatGPT, and I've got loads and loads of other resources there as well. So yeah, I like what I want to do is I want to move people towards using AI for good, because there's an awful lot of ways that it can be used for harm. I want to get people using it for good, and using it properly, and understand the kind of the positives and negatives. I want people to have a measured conversation about it. I see an awful lot of people on the hype train, kind of overhyping everything, and then I see people just say, "Oh, it's just a slop generator that's boiling the ocean." And look, I get where they're coming from, but you're not going to be able to influence things if you take that the kind of extreme a position. I think that if we move closer to the middle and talk about it in a real sense, that we can actually make things better for everybody, and get the most out of using it.
That's a great point. Thank you, Alastair. Look, before we wrap up, if people want to find out about the book, they want to get their hands on your GPTs, they want the toolkits, what's the website we send them to? What's the best way of reaching out to you?
The website is HumanSpark.ai, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So, it's the least worst social network.
Very good. Great way of putting it. Well, look, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world. Do all the likes and follows and shares and help us support the show. Go and check out everything Alastair's doing. You won't be disappointed. He's really got his finger on the pulse of where we're at and where we're going. And he's got some tremendous real world case studies that you need to go and take a look at. But Alastair, thanks so much for being on the show. I can only hope that people join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and thinkers and leaders just like Alastair. But thanks, Alastair. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today, my friend.
Thanks, Simon. Likewise.